The world was 15 years after the disaster. There were destroyed buildings everywhere. The surviving people who had lost their homes and livelihoods were gathering in groups. One man told the guy that this time they decided to expel his sister. The young man did not believe the old man's words and decided to clarify once again what he said, his face expressing excitement and horror at the news he heard. The man said that he could not do anything because exiles are always chosen by vote, but the guy jumped up to him and, grabbing him by the collar, began shaking and screaming for the old man to stop. But then suddenly, 3 people came up. A man, apparently the main one, another man, his advisor, and a woman. She said that not only did the young man's sister have tuberculosis, but she also didn't know how to do anything useful. So why spend money on her? Resources. The boy got angry at the chief's words. He took out a knife and pointed it at the man. But the boss was surprised and mockingly asked that the guy actually decided to raise his hand against him. The man did not take the boy's threat seriously. The young man looked around. There were many men behind him ready to stop him at any moment if something went wrong. The guy calmed down, carefully holding the sleeve of the main one. He asked the man where he left his sister. He briefly answered that in the mountains. The young man silently left this place in search of his sister, and everyone around him, chief and ordinary, laughed after the guy. And so the young man came to the forest and began to look for and call his sister, asking her to come out. The sister noticed her brother but sat silently in the bushes and cried. She did not want her brother to find her, because she did not want to continue to burden him. But the guy still found the girl. He joyfully told her that she had really forgotten that the young man always won at hide and seek. The girl was glad to see her relative and smiled, but at the same moment she pushed her brother away because a huge and dangerous zombie suddenly appeared in front of them. The sister lost consciousness, and the young man began to cry because the girl saved him by sacrificing herself. The guy decides to fight back the monster. He takes out a knife and is going to kill the enemy with it, but the zombie also decides to join the fight and activates red waves of power. The guy's knife cracked and broke in half. The young man was carried into a tree by the attack. The guy regretted that he used the attachment system too late, because he considered himself terrible. The sister lay unconscious in the grass. The young man also lay by the tree and also almost lost consciousness, and the zombie giant stood in front of them, about to kill. They called Wilson by name and tried to wake him up, but as it turned out, it was all a dream, and the guy fell asleep in class. As it turned out, the young man was in class, and the teacher reprimanded Wilson. Darren was sitting nearby. The guy was surprised that he was alive, because the young man died almost at the very beginning of the apocalypse. Wilson began to guess what had happened. The teacher said that quotas for the special zone are very valuable. Only awakening people and citizens under 30 years of age can receive these quotas. Without a quota, the road to the special zone is closed. The guy thought about a special zone. The teacher talked about shelters. The guy suspected that he had really returned to the past. The young man tried to call the system. A blue transparent hologram screen appeared in front of him. It was written on it that this was an attachment reward system, which advised him to start forming an attachment. The guy was glad that the system was still in place, and thought that in his previous life he had not been able to send family members to a shelter. His mother died in the first wave, and then his sister, so the young man decided to be sure to get into the quota this time. At the very beginning of the end of the world, Kevin had the advantage of a group of subordinates. Wilson and his sister had to join them, otherwise they would not survive in this world. But this cruel egoist treated them like slaves. He beat and persecuted his brother and sister for any little thing. Until one day the Awakener came and Wilson saw their power for the first time. The guy decided to save his sister this time. And then a tall, multi-story building appeared. It was Kevin's credit company. Suddenly someone sharply stuck a pen into the man's hand. One of the men held the girl. He noted her terrible character, and the second tried to pull the pen out of her hand. The first man told the girl to control herself, and if she wants to blame someone, then let her blame her useless dad, who committed suicide, or her mother, who ran away. So the girl can only sell her body, otherwise she will be in debt, will not pay. The man added that it would be better if she listened to him and hit the girl with his knee in the stomach. But the girl told the man that they better ask her father themselves. At that moment, Wilson burst into the room and kicked the door down. The villains immediately looked at the guy with displeasure. They asked the young man who he was and why he appeared here. Wilson told the men that he was a superhero and extended a bat in their direction. The chief of the bandits called the guy crazy and ordered his guys to beat him up. Those men enthusiastically directed him to the young man standing at the exit. But in an instant, the guy hit them in the faces with all his strength and speed with a metal baseball bat. Wilson grabbed the boss by the throat and began to squeeze with all his might. The boss's face was frozen with horror and bewilderment. He grabbed the guy's hand in an attempt to resist. The man had difficulty uttering the question of why the guy was doing this, but the young man replied that he had decided to collect debts. And Wilson added that the men owed him a lot for another timeline. The boss did not understand what the young man was talking about. His face began to express not only fear but also surprise. He asked the guy for clarification. The main one, almost crying, tried to escape from Wilson's grip. It was clear that he was scared. The man asked the guy how to even understand this, and who he was. 2 other bandits were lying on the floor, already beaten by the young man. The young man approached the injured girl and quietly asked how she was feeling and if everything was okay with her. The victim opened her eyes, raised her head, and asked the guy who he was. The young man thought about the answer. Wilson turned to the men and said that he had almost forgotten something. The guy approached the main one. He again became frightened. He asked the boy what he was up to. The young man asked the man where the promissory note was, but the boss pretended that he did not understand what the guy was talking about and wondered what the receipt was and added that he did not understand anything. Wilson, with a threat in his tone, asked the bandit to think. Immediately, the boss pointed his finger at the table in fear and in a trembling voice said that the promissory note was lying there on the table. The young man looked in the direction in which the bandit pointed. The guy walked up to the table and studied the contents of the promissory note. Wilson also noticed a dagger on the table. He took it with him. The young man approached the girl, handed him a receipt and a dagger, and told her to take it for herself. Now she doesn't owe anyone anything. The victim angrily tore up the promissory note and said that she didn't owe a penny in the first place. A blue hologram screen of the system appeared in front of the young man, which said that an opportunity had arisen to create an attachment. But at the bottom there was a notification that Sharon had not awakened and could not obtain the skill. The young man realized that first he needed to help her awaken the skill. The young man decided that it was time for revenge. Wilson asked the girl what her plans were and handed her a knife. A surprised expression appeared on the stranger's face. She looked at the dagger with wide eyes. When the boy and girl went outside, black rain was pouring. The guy put his hand forward, which was covered with black drops of water. Wilson reported that black rain had begun, and the young man mentally thought that the end of the world had begun again. A blue hologram screen appeared in front of the guy, which indicated that Sharon had the awakening ability to manipulate metal of rank A. The guy was surprised that the ability was rank A. Another system message has appeared about obtaining the S-grade metal detection ability. There are ability levels from low to high. The abilities are related to the 6 basic senses, and the abilities above the S level are dual senses. The power levels from weak to strong were as follows: storm level, flood level, fire, tsunami, natural disaster, indestructible. The power level is based on the destructive power of the awakened one, and theoretically, provided his powers are developed properly. An indestructible awakened with E rank abilities can also defeat an awakened natural disaster with A rank abilities. The youth only received a D rank ability in his previous life. Because the ability he got was too bad, and he ended up reaching the peak level of the storm, the S-level ability is really powerful, and once the guy awakened, his strength approached the peak level of the storm. While the guy was thinking about all this, the girl came up to him and asked why he had the same abilities as her. Wilson turned to the stranger and answered with a smile because they were the same. The girl was surprised. Embarrassment appeared on her face. Mentally, the guy thought that, of course, this was due to the numerous rewards that he received due to the attachment system, but he could not tell the lady that. Sometime later, the girl and the guy were heading to a shelter in which there was another place. Another person was walking with them. Wilson thought that at the beginning of the end of the world, he needs to bind more powerful people to himself, so he has no chance of getting into the army. The man said that he and the girl both had developed abilities and unlimited prospects. They would enter the military service, which was the best choice for them. The young man replied that he would think about it. The employee noticed the black rain and noted that this world is becoming stranger and stranger. He added that the quota for entry into the special zone is very valuable because they need to discuss a lot with the family. The girl said with a smile that she was giving Wilson her quota. She asked if the guy wanted it. He agreed, and the man standing next to him excitedly reminded that this is a very valuable place that cannot be bought even for $1 billion. Then the employee despaired that these two were creating an illusion for him that precious places on a special military base had sunk into oblivion. Suddenly, a loud scream from a man was heard not far from them. Then an old man appeared, being chased as fast as he could by 3 angry zombies. The girl excitedly told Wilson to look there. There the creatures had gone crazy and were biting each other. The employee stepped forward, protecting the young man and girl, pointed his weapon at the monsters and ordered them not to approach. The zombies had already attacked the old man. They knocked him to the ground. The man commanded the monster that if he moved again, the employee would shoot him. And so the man shoots at the monster with the words that he warned him. He looked up at him. But 2 other monsters were already flying towards him, about to attack. The young man and girl were horrified by what was happening. Not even a couple of seconds had passed before one of the monsters knocked down the employee, who thought that this man had been overcome by something like rabies. Wilson decides to use the ability to manipulate metal. Under the influence of force, the young man tore off pieces of the metal fence and pulled it out with thin and long spears. The young man said that he would solve everything and attack the zombies with these sharp spears. The spears pierced right through the monsters. The guy clenched his hand into a fist and defeated the monsters. They fell onto the road unconscious. Wilson realized that the zombies had appeared before the black rain ended, which happened earlier than he thought. Suddenly, the guy's mobile phone rang in his pocket. It was Wilson's mother calling. The young man told her to listen to him and not go out into the street because it was dangerous there now. But suddenly, the young man was struck by an electric shock. His mother said that his sister had been kidnapped. At the same moment, the guy directed magical waves at the zombies and pierced them right through. Wilson understood that in his past life there was no such thing that his sister was kidnapped. The guy suspected that it could be a butterfly effect. The young man decided that he would not allow anything to happen to his sister, no matter what. At this moment, the guy orders the monsters to die and clenches his fist. Huge metal spikes pierce right through the zombies. The girl was amazed by the strength of the young man. She thought that the guy was very strong. With the same abilities, he was many times stronger than her. So Wilson and Sharon were able to bypass all the zombies on their way. Sometime later, the young man came home with the girl. The guy entered the house and immediately noticed his mother at home. The woman was glad to see her son. Mother and son hugged. Wilson said that everything was fine, he was already here, and promised that he would definitely return his sister. The mother began to cry, and the son asked if these people had left any messages. The woman replied that the kidnappers told Wilson to go to the Kelvin building, otherwise they would kill his sister, and the young man's mother also asked who they were. The name of the building seemed familiar to the guy. He wondered where he could have heard it before. The girl, who had been standing aside all this time, joined the conversation. She explained that this building is Kevin's property. The young man was surprised and clarified what his relationship with Kelvin was. Sharon replied that he was Kevin's half-brother. Wilson was angry. He had not seen Kelvin in his previous life and thought that he had died at the beginning of the apocalypse. The young man told his mother that it was dangerous there and asked her to pack her things. The guy would first take the woman to the shelter, but the mother asked what would happen to his sister. But her son said not to worry. He would return her. While the woman was packing, Wilson reflected that it was his fault for relying too much on information from his past life. The guy understood that the end of the world was too cruel, and if he wanted to protect his family, he had to be more careful in the future. Along the way, Wilson decided to help his mother pack her things. Then the young man approached the lady and put his hands on her shoulders. The girl was surprised with surprise. The young man asked her to tell her everything she knew about Kelvin. Sharon concentrated. Sometime later, Wilson, his mother, and a fellow traveler reached the defense line of a special base, and a guard met them at the entrance to the base. The young man handed him his mother's luggage, and he stood and said goodbye to her. And the guy also said that his mother should come in because he still has a place here, so as soon as he saves his sister, he will send her here so that she can keep her mother company. Mom asked her son to be careful, but Wilson told her not to worry. Her son was now also awakened and said that it was time to leave. The woman did not want to say goodbye to her son, but the young man asked his mother to go inside so as not to get wet in the rain. The woman agreed and went with the guard to the base building. And so the guy and the girl followed the departing woman into the shelter, leaving the base. All the doors were closed behind them. A fellow traveler asked what kind of black rain and crazy people this was, but Wilson himself did not know the answers to these questions. The guy added that this was probably real hell. Then one of the zombies appeared in front of them and turned his attention to the guy and the girl. Before the zombie had time to do anything, he immediately received a blow from a dagger through himself, thanks to the ability to manipulate metal, and after that, the sword was brought back to the owner by a magical blue wave. The defeated zombie fell onto the road, and the young man held the dagger over his palm with his ability. Wilson noted that it didn't look like today would be easy. Suddenly, a powerful explosion was heard on a nearby street, causing fiery waves of flame and a strong, deafening noise. A girl ran up to Wilson and the stranger. She was all enveloped in strong flames. She ran forward. The girl had long red hair, earrings in the shape of 2 moons, and she herself was dressed in an elegant red dress of an unusual style. Although the unknown woman was enveloped in the flames of fire, there was not a single burn on her. Wilson was shocked because he recognized this girl. She was one of the 10 strongest of the end of the world, the Flame Queen Vivian. According to his recollections, she looked exactly the same, only the style of the dress was different, and Vivian herself was able to defeat many powerful zombie enemies with her incredible fire ability. In the past, Wilson met the Flame Queen. She was walking with 2 maids, and the young man then noticed her. At that time, the boy did not yet know who she was, and his friend was surprised that the young man did not know her. He said that now there was an awakened person at the base of the level of a natural disaster. Wilson simply asked his friend if this girl was strong, but his friend grabbed him by the shoulder and began to shake him indignantly, and he explained that this girl was the strongest elementalist. Vivian was truly a powerful and strong girl. She possessed fire magic. Wilson understood that if he could get close to her, he was sure that he would become very strong. But unfortunately for him, Vivian was just passing by for supplies while completing a mission, so the guy didn't get to talk to her. And now Wilson wasn't going to miss this opportunity when the Flame Queen was right in front of him. The young man grabbed the dagger more comfortably and told his new friend if she was ready to fight in this new hell. But the girl was shocked by the guy's unexpected actions and words. Meanwhile, Vivian was already fighting with several zombies. One of the monsters attacked right at her. But the Flame Queen activated her magical ability. She instantly became covered in flames and shouted at the zombies to burn. Vivian's flame spread to a great distance from her, the fire reaching incredible heights. And so the fiery attack of the Flame Queen began to capture one zombie after another, and those, enveloped in flames, could not do anything or even move. But Vivian realized that there were too many zombies for the fire to act correctly. The girl had to admit that her strength was not enough to deal with all the monsters. Suddenly, Wilson jumped out from behind the fiery queen. He intended to help the girl defeat the rest of the zombies. Vivian clearly did not expect that someone would suddenly appear and be able to help her. At the moment when the young man was flying from behind the Queen of Flame, she was able to see the guy and was very surprised by his appearance. The young man used his ability to manipulate metal and at one point was able to pierce the zombies with his power. Then the guy activated another ability called a windmill, in which the dagger not only pierced enemies through, but also due to the super-fast rotation of the sword around its axis. This accelerated the attack and increased its accuracy and efficiency. But the young man was somewhat distracted and did not notice the enemy behind him, who attacked the guy from behind. At the very last moment before the zombie attack on Wilson, the monster was suddenly pinned to the ground by something large from the air. The guy's friend used her power to direct the car directly at the monster, and with all her might she slammed it into the road, while she herself stood on that car. The girl enthusiastically said that this new world in which they must live is interesting. Wilson said that it was time to kill, and a friend said that she would cover, and with her ability raise the remaining metal into the air to fight the zombies. And so the guy menacingly commanded to move forward and fight the enemies. The young man attacked the monster with his ability to manipulate metal, but in the meantime, a second zombie was about to attack the young man from behind. But the friend did not allow trouble to happen. She overturned a huge metal object onto the monster and slammed it into the road with all her might. Meanwhile, the Queen of Flame fought with the enemies. The battle went on for a long time, and finally the young man killed the last zombie. Wilson said with relief that it was finally over, because he was already tired of killing. His friend agreed with him. The Queen of the Flame drew attention to these two. Vivian thought with admiration that those two were so strong that they were most likely at the peak of the storm level. At that moment, Wilson turned to the fiery queen and asked the girl in a friendly manner if she was okay. Vivian excitedly replied that she was fine, and the guy introduced himself and extended his hand in a friendly manner. The Queen of the Flame shook the guy's hand and said her name in response. The system displayed a message that the possibility of binding was achieved with Vivian. The reward for binding was received. The young man received the psychic ability of Class S Ignition. A little later, the guys were distracted. Sharon was drawing caricatures of zombies. The zombie was unconscious, and therefore was not against the girl's prank. The guy stood nearby and watched this activity. Suddenly, the young man noticed red and blue bracelets around his hand. He was surprised by their sudden appearance. Wilson announced that he needed to go away for a couple of minutes and asked him to wait. Vivian wondered where he could go so suddenly, and Sharon continued her activity out of boredom. The guy found a large store nearby and ran inside. There, the young man decided to test the acquired ability to control flames. At one moment, the space was filled with fiery waves emanating from Wilson. A system notification appeared with an offer to accept the ability. The young man presses the accept button. And now the guy could not only control all metal, but also envelop it in fiery flames to strengthen his technique. The young man decided to practice with the items that were lying on the store shelves. One moment, and knives, scissors, hatchets, hammers, and forks were spinning in the air. Wilson took out his sword to try using both abilities on it at the same time. One moment and the knife flew into the air and ignited. These were metal control and ignition techniques. The young man noted that now everything is ready. The two abilities are really perfect for each other. The guy thought that he should already be at the flood level. In fact, the early stage of the flood. This is just an incredible system. Under the influence of fire, the guy's sword melted and turned into a bracelet, which was immediately put on the guy's hand. Wilson commented that this was excellent. It was time to return to the girl, so the guy took a box with something and left the store. Meanwhile, Vivian approached another girl and asked what she was doing so enthusiastically, and Sharon's eyes were shining with enthusiasm. The metal manager painted the faces of the zombies with their own blood and drew various funny drawings on them. Sharon lifted the monster and invited the Queen of Flame to join her activity, but she quickly thanked her and refused. It was clear from her face that the girl did not like this hobby. The metal manager returned the zombie to a horizontal position and no longer invited Vivian to take part in drawing, for which the girl was mentally grateful, and in the meantime the young man had not yet returned to them. The Queen of Flame asked Sharon where they were going and noted that it was quite dangerous here, and it would be better if they stayed at home. But the Queen of Metal noted that Vivian was also outside, where it was unsafe. The Flame Queen explained that she had become separated from her teammates, which was why she was here. Sharon also decided to explain why they were not in the shelter. The girl said that Wilson's sister had been captured, and they were going to save her. After these words, Vivian began asking questions about how this happened, who took his sister, where they took her. Sharon noted that the fiery queen was too worried, but her words made the girl even more embarrassed. At that moment, Wilson returned to the girls. He said that they were going to Kelvin's mansion, and the Queen of the Flame came from the other side. So the young man asked her if she knew what was happening there. Vivian thoughtfully replied that she didn't know what it was like in Kelvin's mansion, but the streets were full of these crazy people. The young man thought about the girl's words. He didn't want to believe that everything was so bad. But then the fiery queen decides to invite the guys to go with them. The young man was very surprised by the girl's words. He did not expect such a proposal from Vivian, so he decided to clarify. But the fiery queen told the guy not to look at her as a burden, because she is also strong, to which the young man smiled and thanked the girl on his behalf and on behalf of his sister. But Vivian said that these pleasantries were not needed. It was her duty. Wilson asked the girl what she meant by her duty, but the queen of the tribe laughed and said that the guy had heard wrong. The young man decided not to argue with the girl and simply agreed, but in his thoughts he was wondering what Vivian was trying to hide. The guy ran up to Sharon, who made a surprised expression on her face, clearly not expecting this. And so Wilson hands the girl the box that he grabbed at the store. The girl was even more surprised by the unexpected gift from a new acquaintance, but she didn't know what was inside. The guy explained that these lipsticks are a great color, but she won't always use the same monotonous color, and added that she should use it later since now they have to go. The guy's new friend was very embarrassed by the unexpected signs of attention. The young man enthusiastically commanded to go forward because they had business to do, and all three continued on to the goal. And so three friends refused at the Kelvin building. Vivian said that this strange rain had stopped, because these crazy creatures on the street should return to normal life, but the guy did not know how it would be. The young man seriously thought about the fact that the joyful people did not know that after the black rain stopped, the real beginning of the catalytic period of the end of the world began. The order of the monster levels from low to high was as follows. First came the catalytic period, the generation period, the growth period, the maturity period, the polarity change period, and the last was the real personality period. There were also alternative levels for the awakening of a person. First there was a storm, then a flood, a fire, a tsunami, a catastrophe, and the very last level, which was indestructible. Now there were zombies, sorry survivors of the catalytic period, so the guy had to get his sister out of there and take her to the shelter before the situation worsened. Wilson invited Vivian and Sharon to go inside the building, to which they walked. The girls did not mind. The surrounding area was too quiet, which aroused suspicion and even fear. And so the three young people found themselves inside the building. Everything around was still suspicious, which alarmed the trio of travelers. The wanderers overcame all obstacles along the way, heading deep into the huge building. And so the three of them approached the elevator. Wilson asked Sharon if she knew what floor Kelvin and everyone else were usually on, but the metal manager was not sure of her information. The guy says that then they have no choice but to go to the top floor first. And with these words, the young man presses the very last number 12, and they all go to the very top of the building. And then Wilson decided that if they didn't find Kelvin there, they would go lower and lower until they achieved their goal. A guy and two girls stood at the entrance to the elevator and waited for him to go down to go up to the topmost 12th floor. And then the elevator doors open, but unexpectedly for everyone, a whole crowd of crazy zombies appears in the elevator, who, upon seeing people, immediately rushed at them. Wilson screamed from the unexpected encounter with monsters. At this moment, the zombie almost flew into place and spread its paws, intending to attack the young man who stood in front, closest to the monsters. The huge mouth of the monster opened right a few centimeters from the young man's face. The guy had no face from the horror that appeared. But the young man was not taken aback. He shouted to the guys to be careful and not approach, and he himself activated the fire ability. At the same time, several fierce enemies were already flying towards Wilson, but the guy formed a fiery sword against them and was preparing to attack the terrible opponents. In an instant, two zombies were already cut in half by the blow of the young man's sword and covered in flames. Meanwhile, the guy attacked another monster with a fiery blade, and he himself commanded the girls that he would cover in front and they would be behind. The metal controller smiled and told Wilson not to worry, and she activated her ability to control metal. At the same moment, metal spears appeared in the air, which Sharon deployed and launched towards the monsters. The girl decided that she would kill all the zombies. At the same moment, the metal controller pierces the enemy right through with her pikes. Vivian deals with the monsters with her own method. The girl activated the power of the flame and plunged the enemy into waves of fire to burn alive. Sharon told her new friend that she was too hot for this world, and the Queen of Flame told Sharon that she was not so bad either. But the ladies had no time to talk. Although the zombies were burned, They were still strong enough, so the Mistress of Metal defended herself from the monsters with a metal frame. Wilson launched one fiery sphere at the enemy, who was pushed back by the shockwave. The zombies noticed this and panicked. Suddenly, this sphere explodes and pierces all enemies who were standing nearby with fiery spears. And so, almost all the monsters were destroyed and lay at Wilson's feet. The guy, holding another such bomb, told the girls to be careful. Sharon answered with a smile to the guy to tell Vivian this, because she doesn't know what the real aesthetics of murder is. The girl herself used her powers to finish off the surviving zombies. Sharon pulled the metal spikes out of the zombies, and after which the girl again attacked the enemies with them, cutting them with these stakes like sharp knives. The young man thought that the Queen of the Flame is now still very young and does not have much experience in battles. Instead of her, Sharon is fighting at full speed. The metal controller had just awakened and was just as perverted as she was in Wilson's past life. She deftly cut monsters in half. Suddenly, all three guys noticed something in the distance of the corridor which plunged them into great shock. A whole crowd of crazy monsters was rushing straight towards two girls and a guy. The young man came up with a plan. He ordered the girls to get into the elevator first. Wilson attached metal holders to the girls' backs, and with the help and his ability to manipulate metal, Vivian and Sharon sent them through the air to the elevator. The guy himself was left alone to fight a new wave of zombie invasion, and so the young man concentrated his ability to control metal. Metal spikes appeared from the floor and pierced the zombies, preventing their movements, which helped the guy gain time to escape. Wilson ran as fast as he could into the elevator, where the girls were already waiting for him. While all three were riding up in the elevator, Vivian wondered what was wrong with this world. Why, when the black rain stopped, there were more crazy people. The girl with red hair added with annoyance in her voice that this was not at all what the Bureau had previously assumed. The Flame Queen asked Wilson if this could be a trap set by Kelvin, but the young man replied that he was more worried about where his sister was now than about whether it was a trap or not. It was more important for him to know whether his sister was safe. The young man thought that after all, Kevin did not have Kelvin in his previous life. The guy suspected that the man had died in his previous life. Wilson commanded the girls to hold on tight. They were rising, and with his magical ability he accelerated the movement of the elevator. Vivian felt this and screamed in fear. Meanwhile, monsters were also raging on the higher floors. But there some of them looked different. They were more advanced than other zombies and had an armored body. Suddenly, the zombies heard the sound of the elevator rising. They crowded in a heap at the elevator doors. The improved zombie also heard this sound and jumped into the elevator shaft directly onto the roof. Vivian heard the noise of this zombie hitting the elevator. She panicked and asked the guys what that sound was. But Sharon and Wilson remained calm. There was not a drop of excitement on their faces. The metal manager made fun of the girl. She laughed and said that it was not a noise, but the cry of the Flame Queen that she had just made. But Vivian denied. She said that she thought she heard a blow. Suddenly, the advanced zombie broke through the ceiling of the elevator with all its strength. The monster jumped into the elevator car straight towards the three guys, who panicked when they saw him. The girls were perplexed what kind of creature this was, but the young man understood what it was. It was a zombie in its growth period, and looked more intelligent and protected than the zombie at the stage earlier. Wilson was perplexed as to how it happened that the zombies entered their growth period so early, while the monster laughed evilly. The guy ordered the girls to get out of the elevator because it was too narrow, and with the help of his ability to manipulate metal, the young man helped everyone get out of the elevator box. When the three guys were already on the roof of the elevator, they prepared to attack the monster remaining in the elevator. But the improved zombie got ahead of them and rushed at the girls and the guy in an attempt to attack them. Vivian asked that this be provided to her and launched a powerful wave of fire directly at the monster. The flames of fire completely enveloped the zombie. But the attack of the fiery queen did not work. This entity pulled its hand towards her straight from the fire. At the very last moment, Wilson managed to deflect the monster's blow and hit the monster with all his might. The young man asked if Vivian was okay, and she agreed. Sharon also decided to try to strike the enemy. He shouted that it was her turn and raised his hand for his metal control magic. At the same moment, under the influence of the ability to control the metal, the walls of the elevator began to twist and compress until they formed a sphere in which such a terrible entity remained, after which the girl sent this ball down the elevator shaft. Sharon laughed cheerfully and said that it was called a happy jump. The Queen of Flame mentally noted that the Mistress of Metal definitely did not have the right idea about jumping. Meanwhile, in the building, not only these three were fighting zombies, but a pumped-up young man was also fighting with him. This guy suddenly heard some sounds and thought that someone from the bureau had come. The pumped-up young man decided to go check on the stairs along the way, on which already defeated zombies were lying, arguing about what all this fuss was about. Didn't the leader say that you need to be in the shadows? But at that moment, Wilson said that that zombie wouldn't just die, so the three of them had to get out first, and meanwhile he was getting out of the elevator shaft. A zombie appeared on his way. The girls followed the boys. They also climbed out onto the floor from the elevator shaft. Suddenly, that same advanced zombie emerged from the collapsed elevator space. The monster was completely unharmed by Sharon's attacks and the fall down in the elevator. The guy noticed the monster and shouted for the girls to be careful. The improved zombie himself rushed as fast as he could to attack the three guys. The metal controller tried to damage the enemy. She raised metal fragments into the air to direct them towards the improved zombie. The girl tried to hold back the villain, running as fast as he could towards the trio of guys with floating pieces of metal. The young man did not think that so soon he would again have to face zombies of the growth period. The guy clenched his fist. Without wasting any time, Wilson activated both his abilities to control fire and metal. The guy realized that he was no longer the same person as he was before. In the blink of an eye, he dealt a double-crushing blow to the enemy. Despite the deep wound, the zombie could still attack. The young man thought that, as expected, the body of an adult zombie was stronger, so he needed to use the force differently. The guy concentrated the fiery power in his hand, and then with all his might he hit the face of the improved zombie with his fiery fist. The blow affected the enemy. Vivian reasoned that it turns out that the power of the flame could be used in this way. The girl did not know this. Suddenly, the clawed paw of a monster appeared from the flames, which was still not defeated and was about to strike Wilson. Dodging the enemy, the young man thought that how could this be possible, since the monster received a lot of damage. But the guy was glad that this time he was not fighting alone. Sharon and Vivian combined their two abilities to control metal and fire and aimed their attack at the enhanced zombie. The monster managed to stop the burning metal rod with his own hands just before it penetrated the heart. The zombie held the rod tightly, preventing it from moving forward. Wilson shouted to the girls to continue attacking the heart of the improved zombie. Sharon and Vivian concentrated their forces and focused on the monster. The young man explained that even during the period of zombie growth, his weakness remains his heart. It seems that the monster's body began to become covered with burns. At the very last moment, the guy got close to the monster, wishing him to die, dealt a crushing blow, and a strong fear appeared on the zombie's face. Wilson delivered a deep double strike with his fiery blade. But the blade broke in half, and part of it bounced off the body of the zombie, which was covered with a blue glow. The young man thought that perhaps the monster had now transformed. Could this really be the power of the period of maturity? The Flame Queen asked what was wrong with the zombie, but Sharon replied that Vivian couldn't see that the monster was perfect for being painted. The young man understood that with his current strength, he would not be able to inflict fatal damage on the monster. Suddenly, the same pumped-up young man who had dealt with all the zombies on the stairs came out to the trio of guys. He said that it was all just hilarious. Vivian recognized this guy. He was an awakened flood-level Captain Leo, and the young man recognized the Queen of the Flame and asked why she was here. But the girl said that we'll talk about it later and asked to help them deal with the monster. Leo said that this guy is not like any of the crazy people he dealt with before. The captain saw that the zombie was dressed like a cosplayer, but Vivian warned that this guy is very strong, especially his bone armor. It is very durable. Capital replied that he understood her, and added that most of all he likes to break hard things. With these words, the guy rushed to attack the monster. And now Leo was already almost near the zombie. He extended his fist to strike. The guy punched the entity in the face with all his might and said that cosplayers are always tough nuts to crack. The captain pulled the zombie by the hand and said that we'll see who is stronger. After these words, Leo began to deliver super fast, super strong, numerous blows to the enemy. From the outside, it seemed that the guy was attacking with 100 fists at once. The monster's armor cracked and crumbled, but suddenly the enemy was able to stop Leo's fist. Wilson shouted to the captain that this was a good chance to attack his heart. He needed to act. The Mistress of Metal and the Queen of Flame agreed with the guy's words. The monster grabbed Leo tightly and was about to eat him. The captain did not believe it and thought that he might be joking. But at that very moment, a fiery attack flew towards the monster. He turned his head and was horrified. In an instant, the fiery blow struck the monster. Wilson calculated the moment to attack the monster with a fiery sword and aimed at its heart. The young man sent his sword at the target, the burning zombie flew down, and when it hit the ground, everything shattered into smithereens and was enveloped in flames of fire. The guy stuck his fire blade right into the heart of the enhanced zombie and told him to die. The fiery blade struck the monster's heart. The fire enveloped the entire monster from the inside and burned it. A huge explosion was heard at this place. The girls and the captain watched what was happening on the sidelines. The guy stood with a burning sword in his hand over the defeated body of a zombie. Leo thought of Wilson that he was a good fighter. The sword again took the form of a bracelet and returned to the owner's hand, and Sharon was indignant that the zombie, which was her drawing board, was all burned out. Vivian approached Captain Leo and scolded him for his recklessness. She said that the guy was too impulsive and almost lost his life, but the awakened flood level grinned and told the lady that she was underestimating him, because the guy was just warming up. But the Queen of Flame was still worried about her comrade. Then Wilson approached them and asked Vivian who this guy was. The girl with red hair introduced the young man as Captain Leo, an awakened flood level. Wilson also introduced himself to the young man, and they shook hands in greeting. The young man thought that Leo's name seemed unfamiliar to him, but his strength was not weak. The guy needed to find out if he could bind him. A blue hologram screen appeared with a system notification that the guy was unable to bind Captain Leo to him. It seems that in fact this guy's heart is much more wary than it seems. The captain told the young man that he was very strong and suggested that they fight together someday. Wilson told Leo that he was not weak either and agreed to fight. The Flame Queen said that they should notify the Bureau as soon as possible. Vivian explained that the black rain had stopped, but these madmen had still not come to their senses. Leo put his hand on the shoulder of the girl with red hair and said that the Bureau already knew. The fiery queen asked what was happening and how long ago these zombies stopped being people. Wilson apologized to the two for interrupting and asking about the Bureau, what they meant. Vivian covered her mouth with her hand because she seemed to have said something secret, but the captain told her that there was nothing wrong with telling him about it. In this situation, the Bureau's secrecy program had long since exhausted itself. The Flame Queen told the young man that she and Leo were actually security officers, an official organization designed to regulate civil awakenings. Wilson clarified that this was not a special security service by chance. The captain was surprised that the guy had heard about the special security service. But the young man answered negatively and added that he was surprised that there was any official regulation of the activities of the awakened. Leo replied that of course it would be, after all. Not every awakened person is mentally stable. Supernatural forces change a person's consciousness, to which Wilson agreed. The guy thought that the Special Security Bureau, isn't it the forerunner of the Sixth Senses Society? The young man knew that the Sixth Senses Society was connected to this. Wilson couldn't believe that they were created before this zombie apocalypse. The young man noticed that isn't the Queen of Flame a representative of the Society of Six Senses, which means she was a member of the Six Senses Society from the very beginning. While everyone was talking, Sharon poked a metal parka in the zombie's face. Wilson asked Leo if he had seen anyone else. Because he had just risen from below, the captain clarified that the young man meant other people. If so, then there are no more of them. There are only crazy people in the building. The Lady of Metals sat all this time and poked her damaged drawing board with a stick. The young man did not want to believe these words because he hoped to find his sister. Wilson silently left them. The Queen of Flame tried to call the guy. But the young man did not turn around and simply illuminated that he had gone. The guy decided to find his sister on his own. The young man made his way into some half-destroyed room and decided to look for his sister among the bodies of people lying on the floor. The young man thought that because he was reborn, his sister was the first to get into trouble. It was stupid to follow previous memories when he changed current events. Suddenly, Wilson noticed a body similar to his sister and could not believe his eyes. The guy carefully sat down to the floor and cried. He was afraid that his guesses would be confirmed. And so the young man grabs the girl's body by the shoulder, intending to turn it face up in order to identify her. But turning the body face up, there was a completely different girl. The young man sighed with relief that it was not his sister's body. The guy decided that it looked like his sister and the others had left before this place fell. Suddenly, the Flame Queen approached the guy from behind. The girl with red hair asked if the young man had found his sister. Wilson replied that there were no traces. They must have escaped before the building fell. Vivian was happy with the guy's words and said that it was good. But the young man sadly said that he simply didn't know where his sister had gone. But then Leo came up with him from behind and said that maybe he knew where Wilson's sister had gone. The guy looked at the captain with hope in his eyes and asked if he knew. Leo replied that the alien energy vibration of the awakened flood level appeared here before, which is why the guy came here to investigate it. Therefore, if Wilson's sister was in the building, then she is most likely with the awakened one now. The guy asked the captain if he had the ability to track the awakened one. Leo replied that of course he could, because he was a professional. And with these words, the young man showed the phone number and location of the awakened one. Meanwhile, Wilson's sister and other guys were brought to a man. Everyone present was horrified by what they saw. This man turned one of them into a crystal. The blue-haired man pointed at the crystal with the guy and told the others why don't they act normal. Blue-haired said that everyone present here is valuable material for him. With these words, the villain roughly squeezed the crystal, causing it to collapse into small fragments. All that was left of the man was a handful of crystals, and the rest of the people looked on in horror. The villain's eyes lit up a crazy red color. He smiled widely and said that it hurts him every time he breaks one of them. Then suddenly 3 men entered the room. They turned to Mr. Steve and said that the experimental equipment was ready. Blue-haired was delighted and said that now we need to prepare for the start. People in doctors' uniforms grabbed the 4 abducted people and took them somewhere. Steve asked one of the doctors where Gina and the others were. The man replied that Mrs. Gina was on the 2nd floor. Blue-haired replied that she was lazy. He would find her, and they would do the rest, since the professionals and doctors agreed. At that moment, the doctors brought the abducted people into the operating room. The awakened resisted and screamed to be released. Doctors strapped the victims to operating tables, and Wilson's sister mentally begged for someone to save her. Meanwhile, with the help of a tracked location marker, the guys got to the right place. Leo said that this is it, since the vibration ends right here. That's why the awakened ones are there. Wilson ordered everyone to go inside. Everyone went inside the estate. Vivian asked the captain if he was sure that there was someone here. But Leo's argument was that even if they didn't believe him, they should believe in science. The young man noticed a lot of dust on the interior and noted that he had the feeling that this place had not been inhabited for a long time. The captain was surprised how this was possible, but the Queen of the Flames suggested exploring the area a little. Wilson speculated that the mysterious awakened ones, coupled with the previous zombie growth period, and the Special Security Bureau, which was prepared for this. The guy mentally noted that it seemed like when the zombie apocalypse happened, a lot of things happened that he didn't know about, and he suspected that Leo must be hiding something else. The captain said that there was no point in searching because the place they needed was here, but Sharon said that they couldn't be in the ground or in the sky. Leo once again studied the location on the map. Vivian reasoned over the words of the Mistress of Metals about Earth and sky. The Flame Queen asked Wilson if he had come up with anything. The guy answered the guys that they could be underground. The girl with red hair suggested that it was most likely in the basement. The captain replied that he just needed to find out, and with these words he swung at the floor, intending to break it. Vivian tried to stop Leo. She shouted at him to wait, but the big man did not listen to her. Meanwhile, 2 men were sitting in the basement. One asked his brother what the kidnappers wanted from them, but his brother rudely replied that he didn't know. But at the same moment, the ceiling collapses right in front of the brothers. One of the men again wonders what happened. One of the brothers carefully removed his hand, which he used to cover his eyes from the dust that arose after the roof collapsed. He did not understand what it was. Leo said there really is something down there. Suddenly, Sharon called Wilson, pointed to the man sitting on the floor in front, and said that it was Kelvin. Both men looked scared. Calvin asked how they knew him, but the young man was hostile to him. He said that, of course, he knew him, because he was the kidnapper of his sister and told Wilson to come in person. That's why he was here. With these words, the guy activated his fire ability and took out his sword. But before the young man had time to do anything, he suddenly noticed blue electrical discharges nearby. This discharge hit right next to the guy, and out of nowhere, a huge boulder flew towards the captain. But Leo easily kicked him away from him. A stone fell nearby with a roar, and the captain noted that the enemies were attacking sneakily and on the sly. Then the voice of a stranger was heard. He said that the guy was strong. Suddenly the rocks parted, and the villain himself and another woman came out. Steve was the awakened one of the peak of the flood level, and Gina was also the same awakened one, the blue-haired one called Leo, a dog that had been following his ass all this time. The captain suggested that the villain rinse his mouth, otherwise it stinks. Kelvin said that the couple took Wilson's sister, and the man himself had nothing to do with this. The young man approached Steve and immediately asked where his sister was. The blue-haired man repeated the guy's question with bewilderment on his face. But the villain then added that if the young man meant the material. And then, with a malicious, vile smile, he added that she must be dead by now. Wilson became confused. He asked the blue-haired man what he said. The guy sadly thought that even when he received another opportunity, his sister died again. The young man began to think that fate could not be changed. Steve added that since they arrived just in time to take her body. Vivian became angry at the blue-haired man's words. She was going to use the fire ability. But suddenly the Queen of Flames stopped. She noticed something at the top. It was Sharon who launched a metal beam straight at Steve and wished him to go to hell. The villain noticed a flying threat overhead. The blue-haired man shouted what kind of violence this was and extended his hand upward. With his ability, the man crystallized a flying metal beam, preventing it from falling on his head. The Lady of Metal got angry and noted that Steve had quite strong defenses. But the blue-haired man did not stop there. He called Sharon an ungrateful girl and continued to work his magic. Huge crystal spikes flew straight into the face of the girl with two hair colors. Sharon realized that this was not only defense, but also an attack. Suddenly, some ropes were pulled under the influence of magic. The girl thought that this was the only way out. But then Leo appeared. He activated the Bloody Berserker of the 4th level of the A-class skill. But he was not allowed to defeat the villain. Suddenly, someone's hands appeared from the floor. The captain felt that someone was trying to grab him below. He looked down and wondered where the hands were coming from. The Flame Queen turned to Leo and called him, but he was gone in just a second. There was a hole in the floor where Captain Leo was dragged. Meanwhile, Sharon continued to fight with Steve. The girl decided to pierce the crystal shell of the blue-haired man through and through using wire cables. The girl succeeded. The crystal shell was destroyed and crumbled into many fragments of different shapes, but the villain himself clearly did not expect this from his reaction. Steve was simply furious. He called the Mistress of Metal and wished her death. Suddenly, the floor fell down. The villain and the girl with two hair colors fell down along with the floor. Drops of blood began to drip from Sharon's lips. The blue-haired man pierced the Mistress of Metals right through with his pointed crystal. The man laughed and said that the girl lost. But Sharon looked up at the guy and with a smile told him that this was right. The villain did not understand what she meant. The girl with two hair colors grabbed the blue-haired man by the hands and shouted to him that he was caught. It was time for revenge, and added why Wilson was so stupid. Meanwhile, the young man walked with a fiery sword and convinced himself that this was not the time to indulge in thoughts. Then the guy started running and realized that he had to do this. And now Wilson is already rushing towards Steve and Sharon standing together. But Gina drew attention to the young man. This villainess invited the young man to meet her, and she soared into the air, an electric sphere hovering above her hands. Gina, using this sphere, began to attack Wilson with lightning, but he was able to avoid her attack. Blue-haired ordered not to interfere because this is his battle, and Sharon called the young man. Suddenly, metal wires began to tie Steve up from under the floor. The man was stunned. The girl with two hair colors tied the blue-haired one tightly with these wires and again shouted to him that he was caught. Wilson flew into the air, raised his fiery sword over the villain, and shouted at him to go to hell. Steve grunted to the two that they wanted to kill him and activated his ice shield. Before the wave of flames from the young man's attack, an ice shield activated by the blue-haired man appeared. The guy flew closer and raised a fiery blade above his head, intending to break the enemy's ice obstacle. The crystal shield was shattered by Wilson's fiery attack, Sharon still holding the enemy with wires. Vivian ran up to the Mistress of Metal. She said that it was dangerous to continue the ability because she was bleeding. She needed to stop it immediately, otherwise she would die. But Sharon replied that she was fine. She was tolerable. Meanwhile, Wilson looked around to see if he had managed to deal with the enemy. But Steve covered himself with an ice shield. The Mistress of Metal thought that she had missed. Blue-haired said that Sharon came close to almost killing him. The entire trio of comrades immediately had a desperate expression of failure on their faces. At that moment, underground, Leo was fighting with a stone golem, who noticed that the guy could see that he was already having difficulty breathing. The golem was an awakened flood level, and his name was Jacob, who said that rats, whom you look down on, easily adapt to life underground. Capital asked Jacob if he ruled the earth. But the golem told Leo that he was worse than a rat, and added that until his body rotted, let him enjoy the tranquility of life underground. Meanwhile, Steve crystallized his entire body. The blue-haired man began to attack Wilson with crystal stakes. The young man realized that the villain had become stronger again, and Steve laughed and said that they were all little ants and would die. Jacob went upstairs to ask Gina if they were finished or not. The villainess replied that almost. The golem asked about Steve, if he had gone crazy again, but Gina replied that he knew him well. Wilson tried to dodge the crystal stakes attacks. Blue Hair was unable to hit the agile guy with his ice ability. The young man periodically cut the crystals flying straight at him. The guy again activated a mixture of two abilities to control metal and fire and aimed it at the enemy. The fiery sword was launched straight at Steve, accompanying the entire space with an airy, fiery force wave. The powerful weapon flew at full speed towards the enemy. The blue-haired man laughed at the guy for being a newbie, picked up and threw away his weapon in the midst of the battle, and he deftly dodged a powerful, fiery attack. But then Steve noticed something was wrong with this powerful fire weapon. The young man told the villain that it was a trap. At the same moment, a spinning golden spear flew towards the blue-haired man. It flew towards Steve and hit, accompanied by a large, fiery explosion. The blue-haired man was unable to dodge this crushing blow, and one of his arms was torn off. The guy was upset that the enemy still survived, even though the howl was close. Wilson did not relax. He understood that he needed to get rid of the blue-haired man immediately. But Jacob hastened to stop the young man. He swung a powerful blow at him with his fist. The golem hits the guy on the shoulder with its painful stone strike. Wilson jumps a long distance away from the villain. But still, Jacob managed to touch the young man's hand. Vivian said that as the villains are not ashamed, when the guy could not win, they immediately attacked in a crowd. However, Gina and Jacob laughed at her words. The girl called the Queen of the Flame a naive girl, and the golem confirmed it. Meanwhile, the blue-haired one made his presence felt. Steve said that he didn't expect Wilson to actually be an awakened one who has two powers. The young man hid his ability to control metal from the enemy in order to keep him in suspense, because he wanted to kill him with one blow. But the villain blocked it, and the blue-haired man also has two accomplices, one electric, the other stone. The stone man dragged Leo away. Now that Sharon is injured and Vivian cannot adapt to this stage of the fight, the only one who can fight is Wilson. Even if the guy was alone against everyone, he decided that he would kill them to avenge his sister. But suddenly the floor began to shake. Captain Leo flew out from under it and began to fight with the stone man. Leo grabbed Jacob by the throat and began to choke him with all his strength. The captain shouted at the golem and said that he enjoyed the peace, and while holding the enemy, he aimed to hit the enemy with his fist. But suddenly there was an explosion. Wilson and Vivian shielded their faces from the debris of the shockwave. Leo looked around and Jacob was no longer under him. He disappeared in a couple of seconds. The captain said that this was not bad for a rat. He was quite fast. A moment later, the stone man appeared among his comrades. The golem himself was scared because he almost received a powerful blow from Leo. The captain asked Wilson how he was doing, whether he could still fight. The young man replied that he should ask because he had just warmed up. Leo invited his comrade to skin these rats together. Then the system displayed a message about the achieved connection with Leo. Wilson received the ability of Rank A, Bloody Berserk. Steve saw the system message and realized what the guy was capable of. Gina said that the evacuation there was almost complete, so they also needed to prepare for removal, but the blue-haired man got angry and told the girl that there was no need to tell him what to do. Gina asked the young man to calm down as he was now out of his mind. The girl asked the stone man to remove Steve from here and let the guy let the crazy people out. Jacob asked if they were going to keep them here because they had put a lot of effort into catching these maniacs. Gina explained that these are just dead crazy people that they can always find. After her words, the villains decided to escape. But Leo and Wilson went to catch up with the escapees. Gina decided to delay the guys with her lightning ability. The girl launched one sphere charged with lightning at Wilson. She launched the second sphere at the captain. But the young men had their own plan for this. They dodged the lightning and ran up to the girl. Leo told Gina that she had missed. But the villainess smiled. She didn't think so. Suddenly, lightning appeared above Sharon and Vivian. The girls noticed how the ceiling began to collapse, and the Queen of Flame covered the Mistress of Metal with herself. Meanwhile, the guys dodged Gina's attacks. The guys noticed something in the distance, but could not see what. The villainess, with a sly smile on her face, asked Leo and Wilson where they were looking. But then Gina formed a spiral of bright blue light, which blinded the guys. They covered their eyes with their hands from blindness. But then they realized that the villainous girl had escaped. It was an almost fatal attack. But then the young men came to their senses and called Vivian and Sharon. A thick layer of dust obscured the view of the entire area of the dungeon, not allowing Wilson and Captain Leo to see where the girls were. The Flame Queen said she died. The Mistress of Metal asked Vivian how long the girl was going to continue pretending to be dead. But the girl with red hair apologized and said that she forgot that Sharon's power was to control metal. The girl with two-toned hair was touched that Vivian bent down to save her, but she still gets in the way when she's on top of her. But suddenly, the Mistress of Metal coughed sharply. Sharon started bleeding from her mouth, and Vivian panicked because she didn't know how to help her friend. The Queen of Flame asked the girl how she felt. She replied that it was normal. The girl with red hair heard the guys calling her. Vivian responded and shouted that they were here. The young men approached a pile of large stones, where they could hear the girls calling. Leo said that they were here. Wilson activated his ability and removed the rubble. The young man asked the girls how they were, and Vivian replied that it was good that the guys appeared here. At this point, Kelvin asked himself what he had gotten himself into. His subordinate brother suggested to the boss that he just run away from here. The man pointed out that there was a dungeon exit not far from their location, so they could leave quietly and go unnoticed. The men looked at each other and decided to run away. The villains carefully crept towards the exit of the dungeon so that no one would notice them. Meanwhile, the guys were still in this dungeon. They were deciding what to do now. Wilson asked Leo if he could find them again. The captain thought about it. The young man clarified with him that this had happened. Leo looked at the navigator and said that the bandits did not go far, but stopped very close to them. The map showed two indicators, one of Leo and the other of enemies. They were quite close to the captain and Wilson. And so the guys, watching the movement of the villains, simultaneously shouted when they stopped. Leo heard some noise in one passage. Wilson told the girls to wait here a little, and he and Leo would see what was happening there. Vivian agreed. At that moment, a flock of crazy zombies appeared, and the villains were running away from them. They were shouting requests for help and worried that they were about to be caught by monsters. It was Boss Kelvin and his brother.